Would you believe the truth if it came from a man everyone called a monster? Harold Whitmore spent nearly 40 years on death row, accused of a crime he swore he didn't commit. But on the day of his execution, he asked for just one thing, for the world to hear his last words. And what he revealed changed everything. What would you do if no one believed your innocence? Comment below. Do you think the truth always comes out, even when it's too late?
My name is Harold Whitmore, born in Jackson, Mississippi in 1911. I've lived my life between fire and iron, shaping what others broke, fixing what time refused to spare. As a boy, I learned the craft from my father, a stern but fair man. He used to say, "Iron is like a man's soul, son. Too much heat and it breaks, too little and it never changes." I spent my life trying to find that balance. During the Great Depression, I saw men trade their wedding rings for a loaf of bread. Even then, iron never left me. I kept forging, sweating in that small workshop, and it was there, in the heat of the forge, that I met Evelyn, the woman who became my anchor. We married in 1934, and a few years later, Margaret was born, my reason to keep breathing. I truly believed that love and hard work could shield a man from injustice. After the war, I returned to my forge on the road between Jackson and Vicksburg. Everyone knew me there. The old blacksmith who could fix anything. Gates, hinges, wagon wheels, plow blades. Among my regular clients was Mr. Thomas Callahan, a wealthy farmer who owned half the county. He was demanding but respected, and I did honest work for him for years. I thought we shared mutual respect. That illusion died in the winter of 1949. Callahan came to my shop with his broken Ford truck. I told him I needed a few days to fix the engine. He wanted it done immediately. We argued. He called me lazy and ungrateful. I said things I shouldn't have. 2 days later, the headline read, "Local farmer found dead on Madison County Road." A single bullet to the chest, and suddenly my name was everywhere. They said I fought with him over money, that I threatened him, that someone saw me near the workshop that night, even though I was home, having dinner with Evelyn and Margaret. But in small towns, rumors spread faster than truth, and it didn't take long for the police to knock on my door. I can still hear the rain that night. Evelyn's eyes, filled with fear and faith, will never leave my mind. I promised her I'd be back before sunrise, but the sun rose, and I never came home again. Now, more than 40 years have passed, and I'm still trapped in this old body, in these cold walls, in this memory that won't let me go. The hammer still echoes in my mind. Sometimes I think it was a warning, that one day I'd be the iron, beaten and shaped by hands that knew no mercy. Today is December 12th, 1990. The air in here feels different, heavier, as if the walls themselves know this is my last night. They say death has a smell. I think it's the same smell I knew from years of working iron, smoke, sweat, and endings. I woke before sunrise, not because I wanted to, but because my body no longer remembers what rest feels like. The guard left coffee on the tray, lukewarm, bitter. I stared at it, thinking, 40 years drinking the same taste of emptiness. Some men dream of freedom, others dream of forgiveness. I just wish I could smell wet earth after the rain. One last time. The halls are quiet. Even the other inmates, who usually shout or pray, seem to understand that today, silence is sacred. Here, when a man is about to die, the air changes. Nobody has to say a word. Time speaks for itself. The old hallway clock ticks louder with every swing of its hand. There's no hurry, but there's no time either. It's a twisted kind of eternity. I spent the morning thinking of Evelyn, how she laughed when I came home with soot on my hands. She said the smell of iron was the smell of honesty, and Margaret, my daughter. I remember her running through the yard with the blue ribbon in her hair. I wonder if she still remembers me as the father who taught her to ride a horse, or the monster the newspapers made me out to be. I haven't seen her since 1952. She was 8 when they sentenced me. Now she must be close to 50. I don't know if I want her to witness my execution, or if I hope she never learns the exact day her father died. I tried to write her a letter yesterday, but my hands wouldn't stop shaking. The words wouldn't stay, like they were afraid to say goodbye. So I decided to speak instead. They said they'll record it. I guess that's the least a man can leave behind when the world erases him. There's something strange about calmness. Men who come here to die usually scream, pray, beg. I don't. Not because I'm not afraid. Fear's been my companion since 1949, but because nothing that waits beyond death scares me more than what I've lived through here. 40 years watching the sun rise behind bars taught me something. Hell isn't a place. It's a waiting. The priest came by earlier. He brought a small crucifix and asked if I wanted to confess. I told him I already did, to God, and the rest I'll leave for him to judge. He nodded and placed a hand on my shoulder. It was the weight of compassion, a weight I had forgotten existed. In a few hours, they'll call my name. They'll strap me down, adjust the wires, and ask if I have anything to say, and I will. Not because I expect mercy, but because the truth deserves to be spoken, even if it's too late. Sometimes I wonder if death is a punishment or a release. But in this place, I've learned that death is just the final kind of silence, and maybe the only place where they'll finally stop calling me a murderer. I was born in Jackson, Mississippi, in a small wooden house surrounded by endless cotton fields. Back then, the world turned slowly, and for poor folks, it turned even slower. My father, George Whitmore, was a blacksmith, the kind of man who believed sweat and a man's word were worth more than any piece of paper. My mother, Lydia, took care of the house, the chickens, and me, the only child who survived out of 3. Poverty taught us not to complain. When there was no bread, my father used to say, "If there's nothing to eat, eat hope. Someday it'll fill you." And I believed him. I remember the sound of his hammer hitting the anvil every morning. That sound was the town's alarm clock. Neighbors knew the sun was up when they heard the irons sing. The forge sat behind our house, and I spent hours watching the sparks fly like tired stars. It was there, between the fire and the sweat, that I learned what it meant to be a man. My father didn't talk much, but when he did, his words came from the earth itself. Iron is like the soul, Harold. If it's pure, it can take the fire. If it's not, it breaks with the first blow. Back then, I didn't understand what he meant. Now, sitting in this cold cell, I understand all too well. Life has struck me harder than any hammer ever could, and yet, I remain whole. I wasn't the best student at school. I missed days to help at the forge, and the smell of smoke clung even to my books. But I loved stories, tales of heroes and wars, not for bravery, but for truth. I wanted to know if justice truly existed somewhere. My teacher, Miss Clark, once told me I had eyes that saw too much. Maybe that's what saved me, or what doomed me. In the evenings, my mother and I walked to the Pearl River for water. She'd say the river carried away bad things. Sometimes I'd throw small stones into the current, imagining they were my fears drifting away. But when the sun went down and shadows crept back into town, I realized some stones always came back, changed, but still there. Mississippi in the 1920s wasn't a kind place for men with calloused hands and no wealth. The rich ruled, the poor stayed quiet, and those who spoke up were reminded of their place. I grew up watching good men being humiliated, innocents dragged away for crimes they didn't commit. Still, my father would say, "Never lose faith in what's right, son, because what's right is the only thing no one can steal from you." When he died in 1930, the forge went silent for the first time. I was 19, and the weight of the world fell on me. For weeks I tried to relight the fire, but it wouldn't catch. Until one night, tired and desperate, I threw an old photograph of my father into the ashes, and the fire came back to life. Since then, I understood. The forge needs a soul to burn, and mine began to live inside that fire. Now, when I close my eyes, I can still hear the hammer's echo. Each strike reminds me of who I was, and what time tried to take away. I don't come from wealth or name. I come from dust, sweat, iron, and faith. And maybe that's why, even now, I still have the strength to speak. Before everything happened, my life was made of small sounds, the hammer striking iron, Evelyn's laughter coming from the kitchen, the soft footsteps of little Margaret running through the dirt yard. There was no luxury, no rest, but there was peace. And for a long time, I thought that was enough. I woke up every day before sunrise. Evelyn made coffee while I lit the forge, the smell of coal mixed with butter melting in the pan. It was the scent of the life I built with my own hands. Sometimes Margaret would stumble in, half asleep, hair messy, and her blue ribbon hanging loose. "Daddy, can I help today?" she'd ask. And I'd always say yes, not because she could, but because her smile made every day worth it. Back then, my workshop was small but known across the county. Farmers came from miles away to have me fix their plows, horseshoes, wagon wheels. There was always work, and I liked to think that every piece I repaired somehow helped keep the world turning right. The old folks said I had blessed hands, but I knew the truth. It wasn't skill, it was respect. Respect for the iron, for time, and for people. That's what my father taught me. Evelyn was the heart of the home. She cooked for neighbors, helped at the church, and always found time to sit with me on the porch at night. We talked about the future, about Margaret, about buying a small piece of land one day, something of our own. She believed in miracles, and for a long time I did too. On Sundays, we went to the little white church in downtown Jackson. Margaret sang in the children's choir. I'd sit in the last row, hat in hand, watching the two of them, my whole world. and feel something I've never felt again since: peace. I remember one day, June 1949. The sun was bright, and we took Margaret to the Pearl River. She tossed stones into the water, laughing, and I thought, nothing bad can happen to people who live like this. But life, it has a cruel way of listening to thoughts like that and proving you wrong. That week, Mr. Thomas Callahan, the richest farmer around, came to my shop. His truck had broken down. He needed it fixed right away. We'd had our disagreements before. He was the kind of man who barked at the poor and thought himself untouchable. Still, I treated him with respect, promised the repair in 2 days. He grunted, left the truck, and walked off without a word. 2 days later, he didn't come back. But that night, they came for me. I woke to pounding on the door, Margaret crying, Evelyn shaking. When I opened it, 3 men stood there: the sheriff, his deputy, and another with cold eyes. They said Callahan was dead, and I was the one who killed him. That was the last night I smelled Evelyn's bread, or felt my daughter's small hands around mine. Everything I was, husband, father, blacksmith, man, turned into one word written in black ink: murderer. Even now, when I close my eyes, I see the forge's fire reflected on their faces, the same fire that warmed our home, and the same one that lit the flame of the tragedy that would consume me for the rest of my life. It all happened too fast, so fast that for years I wondered if it had really happened at all. That night in October 1949, the town was wrapped in fog. They say the air changes when evil comes. And I swear, I felt it. The knocking on the door still echoes in my head. 3 hard bangs, impatient, certain. When I opened it, Sheriff Donald Reeves stood there, hat low, eyes burning with quiet rage. Behind him, 2 armed men. "Harold Whitmore, you're under arrest for the murder of Thomas Callahan." That's all he said. The words hit me like thunder. Evelyn cried, clutching Margaret in her arms. I tried to ask why, what they'd found, but no one answered. They just put the cuffs on me and pushed me out the door. The mud was cold under my feet, and rain ran down my face. Margaret stared. She didn't understand. Neither did I. On the way to the station, the sheriff said nothing. He just lit cigarette after cigarette, letting the smoke fill the silence. They locked me in a cell for hours before showing me anything. Then a deputy threw a plastic bag on the table. Inside was a glove stained with oil and dried blood. Said they found it near Callahan's body. Said it was mine. But it wasn't. I hadn't used that kind of glove in years, and even if it was, it proved nothing. But they didn't need proof. They needed a story. 2 days later, the newspaper headline read, "Local blacksmith arrested for murder of respected farmer." Just like that, I wasn't Harold anymore. I was the monster they needed. They said witnesses saw me near the farm that night. Lies. That night I was home. Margaret had a fever, and Evelyn stayed up all night cooling her down with wet towels. But who would believe a wife and a child over men with money and guns? In those days, truth had an owner, and it wasn't me. During interrogation, the prosecutor showed me an old muddy boot, same model as mine. Said the prints matched. Half the men in Mississippi wore that kind of boot. Still, he wrote it down as consistent evidence. By December 1949, they charged me formally. No witnesses, no real evidence. But the verdict was already written in the whispers. Callahan had power, money, and friends in every office that mattered. I had calloused hands and a voice no one wanted to hear. I'll never forget the first hearing. Evelyn sat in the back row, wearing the blue dress from our wedding. When I looked at her, I saw love and terror. She held a Bible to her chest like it could shield her from what was coming. But God, in that courtroom, felt too far away. They looked at me like I was evil itself. Some spat on the floor when I passed. Others just whispered my name like a curse. And as I sat there facing a judge whose eyes had already sentenced me, I realized my life was no longer mine. No one wanted to hear my side. Not about the truck I fixed, or the argument, or that Callahan's body was found miles from my house. They had their man, and I was him. When they handed me the indictment, the prosecutor smiled, and in that smile, I saw it all. Callahan wasn't killed by a bullet. He was killed by power, and I wasn't condemned by guilt, but by silence. Even now, I hear the sheriff's words in my head. It'll be easier if you confess, Harold. Folks like repentance. But how do you confess to something you didn't do? I stayed silent. And in that time, silence was the loudest kind of guilt. The trial began in February 1951, but my sentence had been written long before that. For weeks, my life turned into a show. People came to court the way they'd go to a fair, curious, hungry for blood, desperate for a villain to ease their fears. And I was that villain. The Hinds County Courthouse was old, with tall windows and the smell of damp wood. I remember the echo of boots on the floor as they brought me in, handcuffed. Some people laughed, some looked away in disgust. There were photographers, reporters, church women with parasols, all there to see the monster, and me, head down, trying to remember who I was before this circus. My lawyer was young, nervous, court-appointed, straight out of law school. He told me he'd do his best, but the jury was too influenced. Later, I learned half of them attended the same church that Callahan funded. In that room, justice and power were family. The prosecutor spoke loud and proud, said I was bitter, jealous, that I hated Callahan for being everything I couldn't be. He lied about money, about threats, about a debt that never existed. He held up the glove and the boot like holy relics. Then came the key witness, a farmhand I'd never seen before, who pointed at me and said, "It was him. I saw it." That was all it took. A confident lie, and the truth was buried. I tried to speak, to explain, told them I was home with my wife and daughter. The judge interrupted, said my words didn't match the evidence. What evidence? A glove, a boot, and a lie. Still, every head in that room nodded in agreement. On the fourth day, the jury left to deliberate. They were gone less than 2 hours. When they returned, the silence was suffocating. The judge adjusted his glasses. "Gentlemen of the jury, have you reached a verdict?" "Yes, Your Honor." "Guilty." Evelyn screamed. Margaret cried so loud the guards had to carry her out. I didn't move, didn't shout, didn't beg. I just looked at the crucifix on the wall and thought, so this is why even God went silent. When the judge read the sentence, death by electric chair, the air itself froze. The cold metal of the cuffs burned my wrists, and somewhere in the back, someone clapped. They applauded my death. That night, the sheriff brought me a blanket and said, "If you'd confessed, you'd be doing life instead, but you had to be stubborn." I asked, "What if I'm innocent?" He laughed. Everybody here is. Evelyn tried to visit. They refused her, said it was for her own good. When she finally got through months later, she looked pale, thin, broken. She held my hands and whispered, "I'll never stop fighting for you." And she didn't. She wrote letters, begged reporters, priests, lawyers, but no one listened to a poor woman defending a condemned man. By the summer of 1952, they moved me to Mississippi State Penitentiary, Parchman Farm, a place surrounded by barbed wire and hopelessness. They said I'd wait there until justice purified me by fire. And the strange thing is, sometimes when I close my eyes, I still hear my father's forge, the hammer on the anvil, shaping iron, shaping destiny. And each strike says to me, "You weren't condemned for killing a man, Harold. You were condemned for being one." Time doesn't pass in here, it disappears. At first I counted the days, then the months, and before I knew it, I couldn't tell if it was summer or winter, Sunday or Monday, if I was still alive, or just waiting to stop being. In 1952, when I arrived at Parchman Farm, I still believed it was all a mistake, one that would soon be fixed. My lawyer said there was a chance for appeal. Evelyn wrote every month, promising to speak with the governor to find someone who would listen. But time started answering for me. One by one, the lawyers gave up. The newspapers went quiet, and promises turned into silence. The cell was small, 2 steps long, 1 step wide. An iron cot, a toilet, a window too high to see the world, and too low to forget it. Death row was isolated from the rest of the prison. Here, time had a different rhythm. The rhythm of waiting. Waiting for coffee, waiting for mail, waiting for the guard to call a name. The name of the one who wouldn't return. In the early years, I prayed every night. Not for me, but for Evelyn and Margaret. Prayed they'd have strength to live without me. Their letters came until 1963. Then, nothing. For weeks, I waited by the door, until one day the chaplain called me and said softly, "Harold, your wife's at rest." Evelyn died of pneumonia, age 52. They didn't let me attend the funeral. I never even saw a photograph. It felt like someone had blown out the last fire keeping me alive. After that, something inside me broke. I stopped writing, stopped speaking, even stopped looking out the window. Silence became my companion. Sometimes I'd hear the guard's boots echoing down the hall and imagine it was my father's hammer. Other times, I thought it was God calling, but he never spoke, just let the sound linger. The 60s came, then the 70s. The world changed. Men walked on the moon. Presidents fell. A wall went up and came down. And I was still here, waiting. I saw men come in young and leave old. Some through the front gate, others through the chair. Each execution made the lights flicker. They said the system purified the sinners. But in here, I learned the fire doesn't purify. It just changes the shape of the ashes. Once, a new guard asked me, "Mr. Whitmore, do you still believe you're innocent?" I said, "I don't believe. I know." He laughed, not cruelly, but with pity. And pity hurts more than anger. In 1975, I heard Margaret had moved out of state. A preacher told me she was alive, had children, but she never came. I don't blame her. She grew up being told her father was a killer. Maybe it's easier to believe a lie than to live with doubt. My hair turned white. My hands shook. But a small flame inside refused to die, the one that reminded me who I was. Sometimes I think that's what keeps a man alive. Not hope of freedom, but fear of being forgotten before he's gone. And that, more than death itself, is what haunts me. The silence that comes after, when no one speaks your name. Some pain doesn't need chains. It binds from the inside, and sometimes it hurts more than iron ever could. The pain my family carried was like that. Silent, but sharp, like a knife that cuts without bleeding. In the first months after my arrest, Evelyn came to visit every week. She'd arrived tired, hair tied back, courage holding her up like a thin thread of faith, brought food, clean clothes, and hope wrapped inside a trembling smile. She always said the same words. "I know you didn't do it, Harold. God will show the truth." But over time, I saw that her faith wasn't breaking from doubt. It was breaking from the world around her. The town turned its back on her. Neighbors stopped waving. No one bought her bread anymore. Children at school called Margaret the killer's daughter. Evelyn wrote once that she came home from church to find our gate painted red. Monster, burn in hell. She scrubbed it off alone, crying, while Margaret watched from the window. There was no safety left, no kindness. Even the pastor who used to share our table stopped visiting. Our little house, the one we built with faith and work, became a symbol of shame. And still, Evelyn kept writing letters, long, filled with hope. She said Margaret was growing fast, reading the Bible on her own, still believing her father would come home. But as the years passed, the handwriting changed. Strong letters turned shaky. Hopeful words turned tired. Then came silence. A guard told me Evelyn got sick around 1962. She worked too much, ate too little. Margaret, still a girl, cared for her as best she could. When Evelyn's illness worsened, the hospital refused to admit her, said they didn't want trouble. She died at home, holding my photograph. The town priest wrote to me, "She left this world in peace, still believing in your innocence. But there's no peace in dying while waiting for justice." Margaret moved in with an aunt in Memphis. She was only 17. For a while she sent letters, short ones, careful, like she was afraid to feel too much. She wrote about school, work, life. Then one day, they stopped, and silence took her place. You know what's crueler than death? It's living long enough to see your absence become a burden to those you love, to watch your name, once pride, turn into shame. They took my freedom in the courtroom, but it was out there, in Jackson's streets, that they killed my family's dignity. Now sometimes I close my eyes and try to remember Evelyn's laughter, the way Margaret held my hand to cross the street. But memories grow old too. Faces fade, voices blur, warmth turns cold, and when I open my eyes, all that's left is emptiness, a silence deeper than any prison. There's a weight you can't see, yet it bends the soul. It isn't cuffs or gates. It's the word guilty rusted onto your name. I thought that weight would shrink with time. It didn't. It only grew quieter, and silence sometimes weighs more than screams. I learned in here that injustice isn't an event. It's weather. It seeps into the cracks of a day, into the routine of the row, into the sound of boots, into papers that return with the same stamp. Denied. First time I saw it was 1953. Then 1956, 1961, 1968. The world changed outside. The stamps did not. When letters came, I opened them slowly, afraid to wake a dream. Inside were cold phrases, no new grounds, evidence sufficient to sustain, no substantial error perceived. Words that don't shout no, but assemble a quiet never. Injustice has a smell. Waxed halls, old coffee, damp paper. It has a sound. The batons tap on iron, the locks click, the faraway chair creaking. It has a touch, hands searching your body like you're an object that breathes. You learn not to move fast, not to stare long, to choose words like nails, each one placed so the roof won't fall on you. I thought long about evil. At first I wanted to give it faces. The prosecutor, the sheriff, the man who lied on the stand. With time, I saw evil is less a face than a mechanism. It's the sum of hurry, fear, pride, and cowardice. It's the hand that stamps because it trusts the stamp before it. It's a small town, preferring a tidy story to a stubborn truth. It's the moment when maybe dies. And forgiveness. It took years to learn forgiveness isn't saying it was small. Forgiveness is refusing to let a lie be your measure. I didn't forgive out of virtue. I forgave to survive. Anger here is a short rope. Pull hard enough and you hang yourself. So I let it go, inch by inch, until only a thread remained. The reminder that I am still me. I feared forgetting who I was. Death row loves to steal names and return numbers. I recited my past under my breath like prayer. I, Harold Whitmore, born 1911, blacksmith, husband to Evelyn, father to Margaret. I said it before sleep, as if checking the lock. When Evelyn died, I feared part of that lock snapped. When Margaret's letters stopped, I feared the rest would fall. But one thing stayed. The taste of truth in my mouth. Truth tastes like clean water. Not much, but enough to keep you from dying of thirst. Some nights I wake to someone calling my real name. Not the one in papers, not the one on the uniform. Just Harold. Then I think God doesn't forget those he named. Maybe faith is that, believing that even when the world reduces you to an error, somewhere your name still fits whole. The weight of injustice is made of questions too. How many hated me without knowing me? How many doubted and stayed quiet? How many could have said wait and instead said go on? I don't know. I know injustice is kin to neglect. And in a courtroom, neglect kills as quickly as a bullet. I can't change what passed, but I can choose how I end. Not as a broken man, but as a whole one. I can't return to my daughter the childhood stolen from her, but I can leave her, wherever she is, a legacy that doesn't stain, the steadiness of what was true. If death is the final silence, let it be a clean one. Let it not carry the dirt thrown on me. Now, older than I thought possible, I've learned dignity isn't a shout, it's a thread. And while there's a thread, there's still a way to hold your own name. It's night in Parchman, the last one. The corridor is quieter than it's ever been. Even the rats seem afraid to make a sound. Outside, the wind slips through the cracks, making the window tap like time itself is growing impatient. It's cold. Not the kind of cold that comes from air. The kind that comes from certainty. The certainty that when the sun rises, I'll be just another number in a prison ledger. The guards walk slower tonight, eyes fixed forward. They don't look at the condemned. Maybe they're afraid to see their own reflection. A few hours ago, they brought my last meal. Cold meat, potatoes, a slice of bread. I didn't touch it. Appetite dies before the soul does. I only asked for a cup of coffee, not for the taste, but for the warmth in my hands. Wanted to feel one last time something that wasn't iron. The chaplain came earlier. He prayed softly, like speaking to someone already gone. asked if I had anything to confess. I said yes. I confessed that I loved too deeply, that I believed goodness was enough, that I expected justice in a world that only understands power. He wept. I didn't. I thought of Evelyn tonight, the smell of bread, her laughter, the way she fixed my scarf before I left for the forge. And Margaret. I tried to picture her face, grown now, maybe with children, maybe still afraid to say her last name. I wish she knew her father wasn't the monster they painted, that if she ever hears my name, she won't hide. She'll say, "My father told the truth." There's a clock at the end of the hall. I can hear its tick echoing through the walls, counting down the seconds I have left. Funny how time, which tortured me for 40 years, now seems in a hurry. Like it too wants to escape this place. An old guard, Officer Barnes, came by earlier, left a cigarette and said, "You were always a calm man, Whitmore." I'm sorry. I said, "So am I." He nodded and left. Maybe he knows what it's like to carry someone else's guilt. I can hear a faint hum. Maybe from the power lines outside, the same current that'll end my life in a few hours. I wonder how many innocent men have heard that sound before, and how many will after me. The walls are covered in marks, scratches made by hands that also waited. I ran my fingers over names now gone. All men who said the same thing I've said. I didn't do it. Some might have lied. I didn't. And tomorrow, when the lights flicker and the world moves on, I hope someone knows that. I don't fear death. I fear being forgotten. I fear the truth dying with me. But something, I don't know what, tells me it won't. Maybe through the tapes that will record my voice. Maybe through someone still willing to listen before they judge. In a few hours they'll knock on the bars and say, "It's time, Harold." And I'll stand up, fix my collar, and walk. Not to die, but to prove, one last time, that truth doesn't need to shout to survive. It only needs to be spoken. My name is Harold Whitmore, and if anyone is hearing this, know that these are my last words. For 40 years, I've waited for this moment, not to save my life, but to save what's left of my name. I did not kill Thomas Callahan. I never hated him. He was arrogant, yes, too much power, too little humility, but I respected him, even when he treated me as less. What happened that night wasn't between him and me. It was between him and his own blood. The man who killed Thomas Callahan was his son, Edward Callahan, the boy who thought the world owed him everything. He'd worked in my forge a few times. Impatient, reckless, drowning in debts his father kept paying off in secret. That week, people said Thomas had found out about the thefts. They argued, loudly, but no one imagined how far it would go. The night of the murder, Edward came to my shop. He was shaking, covered in mud and oil, said he'd done something stupid. He tossed a glove on my workbench and told me, "You're going to help me, old man. You'll tell them my father left alone." I refused, told him I wouldn't lie. He glared at me and stormed out. Hours later, his father was dead. When the sheriff came to my door, I already knew what had happened. Edward needed someone to carry the blame, and I was perfect for it. Poor, familiar, convenient. Worse yet, the Sheriff Reeves knew. Edward was his nephew. They all made a quiet deal. Protect the right blood, condemn the wrong one. During the trial, I saw Edward sitting in the back row, head down, hands clasped. He never looked at me, not once. And when the verdict was read, he stood and left, as if the weight had finally lifted from his shoulders. I carried it for both of us. His guilt, the sheriff's silence, the prosecutor's pride, the town's blindness. And still, I never hated him. Maybe that's what hurts the most. Loving a world that destroyed you. Tonight, the fire that waits for me is the same I shaped all my life. Only now, the iron isn't in my hands. It's me. And that's all right. If death is the price of truth, let it come. But let it take the lie with it. If Margaret ever hears this, know that your father died standing with a clean soul. I don't ask for forgiveness for leaving. Only that you remember I fought till the very last breath to keep the truth alive. The name Harold Whitmore was printed beside the word murderer. But if there's justice beyond this world, tomorrow, those two words won't stand together. Deep breath. Silence. I wasn't the monster they said I was. I was the man they never thought worth listening to. These were my last words.
The tape stopped spinning at 3:12 a.m. on Thursday, November 17, 1990. Minutes later, Harold Whitmore was escorted to the execution chamber. Witnesses said he walked slowly, without trembling, without crying, without a word. He sat in the electric chair with the same calm gaze he'd carried throughout the recording, and just before the hood was placed over his head, he whispered something few heard, but none forgot. Now, let the truth walk on its own. The next morning, local newspapers ran the headline, "Harold Whitmore executed after 40 years on death row." Just another story, just another statistic, just another name crossed off the records of Mississippi. But the tape, that old crackling tape, survived. Years later, it reached a journalist named Samuel Hartley, who worked for a small paper in Jackson. Hartley listened to it over and over, and something inside him refused to rest. He began investigating on his own. And that investigation changed everything. In forgotten county files, he found evidence overlooked during the trial. A fuel receipt signed by Edward Callahan dated the night of the murder, and a witness who, out of fear, had never testified. An old mechanic who'd seen Edward washing his father's truck, gloves stained with oil and blood. Everything Harold had said was true. In 1995, the state prosecutor's office officially acknowledged the mistake. The records were amended. The name Harold Whitmore was finally removed from Mississippi's list of murderers. But it was too late. Too late to give back 40 years. Too late to give back a family. Too late to give back a life. Truth, when it arrives too late, doesn't bring peace. It brings silence. A heavy silence, the kind that feels like an apology the world doesn't know how to make. Today, Harold's cell stands empty. The number 47 above the door is fading. But some say that on quiet nights, when the wind blows from the north, you can still hear the faint sound of a hammer striking an anvil. 3 slow hits, as if the old blacksmith was still shaping iron, or maybe fate itself. Harold Whitmore died as he lived, with his head held high and his soul clean, and his story remains as a reminder that the error of a system cannot be erased by regret, and that the voice of an innocent man may take time, but it never stays silent. These were the last words of a man who only wanted to be heard.